Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Steve Napolitan. Steve, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. I started in film and quickly created a production company that turned into an ad agency over a decade. We shot our first commercial and made the client more money. And then they were like, "Hey, are you in marketing?" And I just am a self-taught marketer. So I went to film school, came out, read every marketing book I could, which led me to speaking and teaching because of the awards we won. People asked me to share. And then I had to learn how to teach. So I've had so many different modalities. And then the next step was psychology, because teaching person A and person A goes off and does it, and person B doesn't. So then I had to say, what's going on inside the mind? So typically now I work with C-level executives and entrepreneurs that have found success, but they don't have the life that they want. And so I bring in all of these mindset, efficiencies, marketing to help them have more business while they design their ideal life. And my mantra is more business, more life without sacrifice. So that's I guess that's the 2-minute version of my life, Thomas.
Well, it's a great mantra. I have to be careful because I also went to film school, so I can get lost in the weeds there a little bit.
Probably.
But do you ever, is that kind of a closed chapter for you now, or do you kind of think about maybe going back into it at all?
Well, yeah, it's actually happening right now. Funny that you should ask, because, I thought, and all my friends, they're like, "You've gone so far from where you started." And I think of the Steve Jobs quote. He said, "You can't connect the dots until you look back." And I think I was meant to go through those chunks, those milestones that I just shared with you, because now I'm taking my lessons and all the things I'm learning, I'm teaching, and turning those into movies. We're starting with documentaries and episodic things that we're starting to work on, but I could also see it coming into narratives because they're so easy to follow story. And even as a speaker now, as I've been a keynote speaker, the thing is all the storytelling. So even that comes from my filmmaking days. How do we tell a story effectively? Now I can do it with an oral presentation, and also I have so many slides. Right now we have keynote or PowerPoint, and you can, share a visual, piece while you're speaking. So I think those lessons are in me, and they're very deep, and they're a part of everything that I do.
Interesting. So I wanted to cover sort of upfront your approach to, getting more out of your life versus not working all the time. That's probably not summarized very well. Just because I feel like that's where your focus is at the moment. But
Yeah,
once we cover that, are you happy to go into your story a little bit?
absolutely. Yeah. I'm open, whatever you'd like to share. So what you'd like me to share. And I think, so which one do you want me to start with?
I think from the point of view of like upfront, I really want to get your perspective on the work-life balance stuff. I'm not sure whether
Okay.
you refer to it as that necessarily, but
Well, I think it's most commonly shared as work-life balance. I kind of like the word integration more. People ask me, "Are you a life coach or a business coach?" And then I often say, "Well, when do you die when you go to work?" And I hope you don't, but we're living all the time, whether we're working or not. And then even for myself, I'm very passionate about my work. I actually really enjoy my work, so it's even easier to get lost in the work. So those that are listening now, if you're listening to this and you are passionate about your work and you can drive many hours, the first lesson that I had to learn, and it's a tough one. It's very simple, but it's very tough. We have to stop. It's a simple word, right? We have to stop. I'm laughing, but it's a serious thing here. I had to actually give myself a certain amount of hours, because what I found is, especially being an entrepreneur, and I see many executives do the same thing. We just work until the work's done. But guess what? The work's never done. I mean, that's the reality. There's so many things that always getting added to the list. We're ticking the boxes off, but it just keeps growing. And so what I found I had to do was actually create structure. And it kind of goes, it's almost an oxymoron from freedom, but I found structured freedom is the result. If we just want to be the feather blowing in the wind, we're just going to, then really the wind has the control. And so what I found is we have to own our day. And the thing that I found was, when I actually told myself, okay, I'm going to stop at this time, at the very beginning, I would be upset with myself. I would close my computer down and I'd walk away and I'd be like, oh, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. But what happened very quickly, within a matter of a week, I had to get smarter about what I was doing with those hours that I was giving myself. And then my effectiveness went through the roof. And there was a lot of strategy that went through it. But what I could give the audience now is that I had to start thinking, what could I eliminate? What could I delegate? And what could I automate? And I thought about that every day is how my method came. So I call it plan tomorrow today. So if you couple a couple of these things together, if you tell yourself, I'm only going to work this amount of hours, then if I do a little meeting with myself for about 5 to 10 minutes before the next day, then I would actually figure out what's most important for tomorrow. And many people say this. I'm not the first one to say this. I'll be really direct. I mean, this is the reality, though, is you have to do it. You have to put it. And you'll know this because I'm a historian. We're going on to film. But if you remember the Apollo 13 film with Tom Hanks, and in that situation, they figured out how to get the capsule, the Apollo 13, back to Earth, but it wasn't going to have enough oxygen left in the capsule. And they brought all these parts that were no longer needed in the capsule, and they dumped it on the desk with a whole bunch of engineers. And they're like, hey, they're going to run out of air in about 13 hours. You have 13 hours to figure out how to create an air filter. It's that kind of pressure induced on myself that I have to finish work in 6 hours or 5 hours, whatever I want to do to be with my family. And then I have to work smarter. It's easy to add more hours. It's harder to actually think about what to do, but it's not impossible. And if we actually concentrate our efforts, you can go really far. So that was one of the things. And it takes habit, Thomas, just to conclude on this, be kind to yourself. When the day doesn't go right, the worst thing we can do is beat ourselves up all night. You have to say, okay, I'm going to reset tomorrow and I'm going to give it a go. And that changed my life when I just started doing that, giving myself permission to say, okay, that didn't work quite how I wanted it. What am I going to do tomorrow? And just giving myself that every day. Then I was able to create the life that I want now and outperform many people. Like in 4 hours, what people do in 8 hours, I typically can accomplish because I'm doing the most important thing.
I think a really interesting thing to highlight there. Adding hours onto your day is typically what an overachiever will do. But if you look at achievement as though, can I get all that work done in this time frame? That is an achievement in and of itself. So if you've sort of flipped it on its head a little bit,
Well,
it's a great message.
Thank you so much, Thomas, because I want to add one other metaphor real quick, and you'll see I'm all about story metaphor as you brought up with this. But if you think about a drill, a battery operated drill, and you only have one battery and you're drilling away, because that's our life, right? We only have one battery in this body, and we need to rest. We need to sleep. I'm a big fan of sleep. And before I wasn't, I used to say sleep is for dead people. I actually said that to people. And now I'm like, I love my sleep, because when you're drilling holes, let's say with a battery operated drill, and you get to the last 10 holes and the battery is draining and it's going and it's barely drilling a hole, then what's the best choice? To keep going on those 10 holes and spend all night getting those last 10 holes? Or do we stop, plug the drill in, go home, come back, and in a matter of minutes, drill those 10 holes? And I would definitely pick the latter, because that's better for life. Then I can go enjoy my family and my life, come drill those holes tomorrow morning. And I believe this to be true. And just as an example, last year during 2020, in 11 months, it's my fastest success story. I took a $42 million company to 57 million. Well, the two founders that were working 80-hour work weeks when they met me, down to 40-hour work weeks, reduced work hours in the whole company. Because a lot of executives, Thomas, they realize when I start getting their work hours down, they're like, I'm working smarter, I'm making better decisions, I'm doing this. And I'm like, wow, wouldn't you like that for all your staff? So this is not just for the upper echelon. This is not just for the leaders. It's like, no, everyone should sleep. Everyone should work less hours. And guess what? The company's profits go up. And that is now dozens of companies that we've done this with. It just makes sense. When you're rested, you work smarter and more efficiently.
Amazing. So at what point did you introduce this philosophy into your life?
the it wasn't all one moment, but if I were to pick as close as I can get to that, it was when I was 31 and I met a mentor. So from 19, I decided to be an entrepreneur at 19. I guess this gets a little bit into my story, but my father, I grew up in Silicon Valley in California, where all these tech companies emerged. And during that time, during my youth, I saw the Hewlett Packards and the Apple computers and all those things happen. And my dad worked for a big tech company, and he worked all the time. And so there was always that little boy inside of me as I became a young adult that I didn't want to be like my dad, because I didn't have him there to play ball or to do those things. When I went to bed at night, he was working still. And when I woke up, he was off to the next day. And I have to also say, I'm very grateful for everything he did. We never went hungry. We never went without shelter. We never went without, the things that we needed and some comforts. But there's some of those things I would have traded easily to be with my dad. Right. And so when I turned 19, I was like, oh, the answer is be an entrepreneur. Don't work for someone else. And then I quickly started working harder than my dad. I realized that, it goes back to what I was just sharing with you, that I figured out over time. I was working so hard to not work. And that doesn't work. It's like digging a hole to get out of a hole. You just get deeper and deeper and deeper. And I really needed a ladder or a rope. And that came with a mentor. One of my friends dragged me to an event, and I wouldn't have gone because it was a 3-day event. And my son was recently born. So now I'm married. I have a young child, and I'm 31 years old, and I feel broken. And to be really direct, I felt and be vulnerable here. And I found vulnerability has helped me a lot in my life. I felt like a loser. I really did. Even though we were working with all these big companies at this time, done millions of dollars in campaigns, I was a mess. I really was. And I felt like I'm a dad now, and I'm worse than my dad. I really felt like I was worse. And then my friend invited me to this event, and I was like, no, because I have to work so that I could go home and be with my son. And the reality was I would have worked more and had very little time with my son, if at all. And so I go to this event, and I'm already looking for the doors to get out. I'm like, how do I escape? I showed up for her because I wanted to, be grateful for her buying a ticket for me. And I'm there. And then the first speaker comes out. And I don't know if you've ever been to an event where it feels like there's over 100 people in the room, and it felt like he was talking to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's saying everything I needed. It was like my whole life was trying to go up this mountain, and I was getting washed down by the river, couldn't get through the thistle bushes, couldn't get around the boulders. And this man walked all the way up, and he's on stage waving from the top of the summit. I'm like, oh my gosh, who is this guy? So I jumped up on the stage. I kid you not, there was stairs on both sides, and I jumped on the front. And I thought at that time that all speakers were extroverts, and I was totally wrong, because I went up and I'm like, hi, I'm Steve Napolitan. I have to work with you. And he turned, he's like, maybe. Totally freaked out that I was in his space. And I was able to save it. And that man became my mentor for 8 years. And he really, within the first year, he increased my profitability by double in 12 months and reduced my work hours by helping me change my thinking. Because ultimately, if I were to say one thing, Thomas, there was a lot of business strategies and things. Yes, there were. But the biggest thing that changed everything was my belief that I had to work to achieve. Like you were just saying a moment ago, that achievement meant how many hours. The badges of honor were how hard I did it. No pain, no gain. If there wasn't pain, then I wasn't gaining, which I believe now there's a lot to gain without pain. I'm not saying you don't gain from pain. I'm not saying that. However, I am saying you can gain without pain. And I am okay with seeking that. And that's the short version, but that's a good chunk of how I changed my life.
Was it a well-known mentor?
Well, he's actually not super known, but he's public. He's spoken on stage with many people, Sir Richard Branson and Bill Clinton, a whole bunch of people. But his name's Jeffrey Slater. I'm happy to share his name. He lives in Australia now. He was born in Hawaii, and then I met him when he lived in San Francisco. And then he traveled all around the world speaking and teaching. And he fell in love, because he's also a surfer. So he fell in love with Byron Bay, if anybody knows that, in Australia. It's a beautiful place if you ever get to go there, and the beaches are amazing. And I could see why he landed there. But he doesn't travel as much. He's definitely got a heck of a life himself, and he's a tremendous man with huge heart, and he definitely was a big part of my life. So yeah,
Wow.
and still is.
Like he was introduced to you at the right time. So Sounds good.
Exactly the right time, because I was crashing, Thomas. Like, it's that moment you hear too often. It's like, the plane's going down, and in some ways it was bumping trees and all of that, and I was getting hurt, and he was helping me lift the nose of the plane, get it going.
Do you think that any part of the working all the hours under the sun issue, do you think that that might be a business stage issue? So let's say you're in a startup and you haven't got many funds, and what you replace through lack of funds is extra hours, and then that is a habit which you make, which you then continue forward to the point where when your business does grow, actually you don't need to do that anymore. Do you think there's any merit there?
Why I like the word integration over balance is it doesn't mean that I never work a little bit longer. It does happen. I mean, even through 2020, there were so many changes in my business. There were, some times, but I don't allow it to become a habit or a frequency. And I've been testing this too with startups. What I've found is what happens is we get a whole bunch of stuff. It's stuff, right? It's these lists of things that we believe have to be done. Again, it comes back to beliefs. And whenever I put pressure on that, whenever I do it, whether I'm consulting a startup or a $10 million company or more, the habit is to not, I think, and what I've seen, prioritize properly. And so even at the startup phase, if you were to prioritize properly and go for what's most important, put most of your attention there, then you can create that opportunity. Now, it doesn't mean that I never work more hours, but we don't want to make it a habit. I think everyone can have, I would say up to a 90-day sprint. After that, you start deteriorating your human potential, really, because you're not giving recovery. And then even a startup will cause delay in their thing. And that's where I've sped up, profits. It goes back to even like software, because again, growing up in Silicon Valley, you look at a lot of software companies, and I saw some, and they went to town for 2 years in a bubble, work, and come out with an offering, and then it falls flat. And the reality is that's why they call it an MVP, a minimum viable product. And any company can take this into their business. You have to have that opportunity. So if you're starting out, my first thing is what's the fastest path to revenue? And what do we need to do to get that one thing going? And even if you have this gigantic idea, then what are the small steps that you could actually create revenue to create that, so that you can actually get the company going and you can hire? What are the strategies? So this is where I really get strategic. Let's not, this one, I'm just going to make something up. Let's say it's 2 years to develop this piece of software, and that's our dream. Well, what can you do? What are the pieces of that software that we could potentially create in? So this is what if I was working on something, I'd say, what can we create that we could sell that will help us fund creating this 2-year project? And what is there? Like, a story, if you look at Built to Last with Jim Collins, even Sony that came up with the pocket radio, right? That they shrunk that down so you could carry music with you. It was a breakthrough. That's not how they started. They made heating pads to make money, to hire the best engineers in Japan. Their mission was to show that Japan could make great products after a bad period of life. We know this is post World War II. A lot of egg on the face. They wanted to prove that we can do something great for the world. And that was their premise. So they just did anything they could to make enough money to hire the best engineers in Japan. And then they didn't even have a mission. They didn't say, oh, we want to make the small radios, and we want to make a Trinitron TV. Oh, and we want to make the Sony PlayStation. They didn't even know about any of that. They just said, let's make this thing. And I think that's where a lot of startups get in trouble. They want to make this big, grand thing. Great. I'm so happy for your dreams. Don't give them up. But what are the small steps that can actually allow you to become profitable and fund your project? And that's where I would push back a little bit and say, again, push back. How can we work smarter? Because it's easy, again, coming back to it's easy to give more hours, but doesn't mean it's the right decision. I would put a big question mark on that.
Yeah, when I asked the question, I immediately thought of your drill analogy. So, if you're drilling holes and the battery's running out, well, you just recharge, and the following day it's easier. So, Yes, it's an
Yeah.
interesting concept, and like there's a an involuntary, should we say, reluctancy to accept it on my part. Is not something that I have consciously thought about, but I still kind of, have that reluctance of, you got to work all the hours you possibly can, and it shouldn't really be there. It's
Well,
not
and that's
logical.
why, Thomas, sorry to jump in there, but that's why a lot of my work, and I typically don't say this all the time, but it's been coming out more and more, because people come to me for more business, but really I'm teaching them how to have more life. And that's why I have to put both those words in my trademark. But the reality is that this is true. And I had the same thing. My family were Italian immigrants to the United States, and work ethic allowed them to survive and work through this. But we are, fast forward many years, we are in a different time with more opportunity than our ancestors ever had, more global workforce. I mean, look how you and I are doing this interview right now. We're on different continents, and even 10 years ago, maybe this is 15 years ago, I remember making a long distance call to Canada, and I was like, should I make this call? Should I pay for this? And I made the call, but I mean, it's crazy how here we are at this level. So I guess my point is that we have to reprogram ourselves, because the belief structure is still thick with the way that we watched our parents run their lives. And then there's this preconception, a perceived thing that we need to do the same thing, even though now we have so many more tools to speed up business. It's we don't need the Flintstone car anymore, Thomas. That's the best way. If you ever saw that cartoon, we're pedaling away, and I see so many business owners and executives, they get the car going really fast and they're pedaling as fast as they can, and they're like, I can't go any faster. I know, that's why we build business, so that we can be in the car and it can do the work. It drives faster, the plane and the car drives faster, the train. Let's use that and sit back and relax a little bit. And I guess that would be another. There I am with another metaphor. I can't help myself, Thomas.
It's a good one. The other thing that popped into my mind was about the fact that I've heard people talk about how automation and also the tech gadgets and everything was supposed to make us, it's supposed to make things easier for us, kind of like, instant email and that sort of thing. But actually, people are busier than they ever have been. And what you're saying is we really don't have to be, right?
I am. Yeah, I am. And that's where the work lies. I would go as far to say sometimes 70 to 80% of the work with someone that I work with is resetting the mindset, because we have a belief that we have to keep working harder. And then I just say, no, you don't. How can we do that differently? And we just start asking a lot of questions, and all of a sudden it starts to settle in. And it's like, oh, wow. And, I actually have to negotiate with some of my clients. I'm like, hey, why don't we try this for 2 weeks? If it doesn't work, we'll go back to the old ways. And even, in fact, if we get into emergency mode and you're like not even through the 2 weeks and it's not working, you always can go back. I'm not taking anything away. You can keep doing the old way if you want, but why don't we just give it a try? And then they come back. I remember one CEO came back from a trip to Italy. This is obviously pre all of last year, but I said, how are you doing? He said, oh, it's amazing this time off. I'm making better decisions. I think I'm at my peak performance in my business. My to-do list is shorter. I'm using all the tactics of delegation that you've taught me. And then I looked at him, I said, great. Now, could you imagine all of your staff having the same feeling? And then that's when the light bulb went on. He's like, oh, wow. And we implemented that, and he doubled his business in 18 months. So that's where the numbers don't, and this is where my filmmaking is coming back in, Thomas, because now I'm documenting those so that we can prove that it's not true that you have to have pain in all the way that you gain. And it's not true that you have to work a zillion hours, like it's an old mindset. We have to, it's time, our generation and the generation after us, shift this concept.
You mentioned that there are also some business strategies introduced at the same time. What would you say that springs to mind first in terms of the strategies you introduced to increase the profits, as you said?
Yeah, well, I mean, on the marketing side, You know, a lot of people I find, and I don't know if you find this sometimes, but people think marketing is advertising. And, you know, marketing is so much more than that, right? It is the branding, it's the positioning, it's the pricing, you know, and then promotions do come into that. But there are many layers to this. And so looking at that, I call it, and this is from other marketers, you know, some famous copywriters like Dan Kennedy. And, you know, I've also got to spend time with like Ryan Dice from Digital Marketer. And, you know, we typically call it the client value journey. And I find that a lot of companies don't create a customer journey really well. And a lot of sales get stopped in market. And this is where the first step, because if we're going to help grow business, then we need to start increasing revenue, because then that allows you to buy more software, to hire more people, right? So we start creating. So one of the first areas, I guess I'll go back. The first area I look at is your calendar, like I already brought up. So that's the first thing I do with anyone. The second thing we do is we look at how can we better work with your customers. And I'll say one thing, and this is again gonna maybe sound shocking, but the one thing I call it wow clients. The first thing that I find, and you'll notice that time is important to me. You know, you might see that with everything that I've said, but you know what's more important? Energy. If you have all the time in the world, but you don't have energy, if you're unhappy with who you're working with, then it drains you. And these are my own statistics, but I would say it's about 5 times the energy to work with a client that I would call ow. So it's wow and ow, right? The ones that hurt you. And many of us do this, and I did it too. I'm like, I got to make money, so let's get clients. And oh, I don't really like working with this person, but we need to, right? We get into that mindset. Again, it's another mindset. But the reality is, I remember the first client that I like really fired, I let go. It was not a small client. It was at that time my biggest client, multiple 6 figures, but they were beating up I only had 4 staff members at the time. They're just beating us all up. The morale was going down. I didn't even want to go to work anymore. I started feeling like garbage. I'm like, oh, and every call was another emergency. And they were mistreating us. That was the worst part. So I had to tell them, I said, listen, if this is the way you're going to treat us, then we shouldn't work together. A week went by. I was all happy for a second, you know, and then the next week it went back to the old ways, and I finally let them go. And it was a huge realization to me. And I brought all my team in. It was a small office and I'm loud. So everyone heard me let go of the client. It was so quiet in the office. I said, everyone come in here. And I said, look, does anybody really like working with this client? No one said anything. I said, yeah, that's exactly what I thought. So why don't, even if we have to get 5 clients to replace this one, I think we're all going to be better off. And I just initially started to focus on the ones that we really liked. And then that exploded. And I call it the 4 R's. When I started working with people that were wow to me, we got more results because we were able to go the extra distance because we wanted to. That brought more revenue. Not only would they spend more money with us, but they consistently spent more money with us because they were in love with the relationship. They were raving fans because face it, who writes reviews? People that love you a lot, right? They have to be over the top. Oh my gosh. Or they're like, this is unbelievable, unacceptable, right? So it's on the extreme that people even get to their keyboards. So that's another reason we don't even want those bad reviews. And then the last R is referrals. So, and this comes from a speaker, Jim Rohn, back from the 70s and 80s. And it's the last point to this, that he said the 5 people you hang out with are the average of you. And if you ever test this out, if you take the people that you spend the most time with, you average their, you know, the money they make, how many holidays they take, where they live, it's usually an average of you. And I took that concept. I was like, wow, that works with wow clients. So I really focused on my wow clients, and guess what? They have more wow clients. All their friends are very much like them. So it created this whole mechanism. And so one of the second thing, right? First thing is calendar when I work with a client. Second thing is we really focus on beyond target market, the wow client. And this transcends revenue. It's amazing. Like you would think, again, this is one of those things I deal with oxymorons all the time, Thomas, because you would think if I only do the wow, I would have less clients. And we found that once you do that, it actually puts such a spotlight on what you do in a high way that people start talking about you more. And I think, you know, because I know you have some background in marketing, referral marketing, no matter how many ads we do, we're all hoping that we get enough conversations. I mean, why do we create ads? So people talk about us. And if we can get enough people talking about us, then we're going to have a better business. And that principle comes into play here. And so now and no joke, I had one client that I actually just saw last week. She quadrupled her business, and just on these principles, the letting go the clients that were taking her time, because they take your energy and your time, the ones that we don't want to work with. And if you really thought about that, if you think long and hard, you're like, oh yeah, I do spend more time with the ones I don't like. Yeah. If you gave all that time to the wow, I can almost promise, I can't, it's up to you and you doing these things. I mean, I can only guide, but I would make an argument that you'll make more money. You will make more money.
Very well, amazing answer, as is the first response to that. I wanted to pick up on one thing, which is I normally quote around maybe 3 people. I often quote there's 3 people. The only person you haven't mentioned so far is Earl Nightingale. Have you got any Earl Nightingale background at all? Because you've already quoted Dan Kennedy and Jim Rohn, and those are the 3 people who I always
wow.
From.
Maybe I need one from you, because I know Earl Nightingale, and but I can't have one pop up to the top of my head. And maybe actually you just pinged me to go like do some homework. But yeah, I don't have one off the top of my head. You got me there.
Yeah, I just meant in terms of like inspirations. I didn't necessarily mean.
Well, it's okay, but I'm writing it down because I take all those things. You might call it a coincidence, but I'm like, oh, maybe I should be looking at that. So I took a quick note. So thank you.
Is the getting rid of the problem clients, is that around the time where Dan Kennedy's talking about time vampires with his time management book, or is that?
I think that can play into it 100%. And then I also think of other sayings like, where our focus goes, energy flows. And I think many people have said that. I don't know if Tony Robbins was the first one that said that, but it really started to make sense, because when I'm having phone call after phone call of problems, where is my focus going? Right. And so that, I think, triggered me more, but it is the same. It is also time vampires. You're absolutely right. I mean, those all kind of work in the same theme. You're getting the attention drawn to the ones you don't want the attention drawn to. So I had to actually start letting them go, which is scary, by the way. And I got to say this, because I speak to a lot of audiences, and I don't want you to go fire all your clients and call me and say, oh my gosh, I'm broke, Steve. What the heck were you talking about? If you have a lot of OWL clients, you have to make a plan, just like getting out of debt. You have to make a plan to slowly move away from those types of clients and work towards your wow. And so, yeah, I guess it's not, maybe that's not a direct answer, but that's really the method. I want to focus on what I want, not what I don't want.
Sounds logical, Steve.
Yeah. There's simple principles, Thomas, but we just, it's all of that mindset. We've been trained to grind. We really have. Many modern societies, and this is, I've spoken around. It's, some countries have it worse than others. Some cultures work even harder than others. But I think there's so many of us all around the world thinking that our effectiveness is the amount of hours we put in. And it's just not true.
Well, I'll have to do some reflection on that. I'll watch some of your videos. And the reason I laugh was because when I watched your speaker reel, which is great, there's a bit of you like going, business is simple. Like in a much better way than I just did there. But
yeah, well, I appreciate the sentiment. It really is simple. I often say this and people laugh. I say, business is this. You find your wow client, which I kind of just explained to you. You ask them what they want, then you give it to them, as long as it doesn't hurt them. If it will hurt them, then I'll stop. But then we give them what they want, then we teach them what they need. And so often we start teaching, and that's where we get this gap in sales, because there's this education that has to happen when it doesn't. This goes back to that client value journey. What are the small steps that people want in order for them to then, get to where they need? And often in marketing, like I think you saw in my speaker reel, the chiropractic story. Like I once had this chiropractor, it's a true story, that he he was, pain relief was his game, right? If he helped you in your body, you got your pain relief. But everyone says that. We started asking his patients what they really liked about his office. And many of them said on-time appointments. And I was taken back. I was like, whoa, I've never heard this before. And I went to him and he said, I don't like waiting at the doctor's office. This is the doctor talking. He said, I don't like that. And I just made it a point to work and make, as on time as possible. And I said, wow, what if we make every appointment on time? And so then we told all the patients, we're like, hey, would you like to see the doctor right at the time that your appointment is booked? And many people said yes. And we're like, great. We just need one thing from you. We need you to be on time. So you have 5 minutes. If you're 5 minutes late, your appointment's canceled. We're going to save an hour every day to move appointments if we need to. So just call. If you're going to be late, we'll move you the best we can. But you need to be on time. It's a mutual culture. So we recreated, and this is, again, marketing, right? This is branding. This is creating a culture. People did leave. There are people that can never be on time. So he was no longer the doctor for them. But what happened is, go back to the principle, we find our wow client, people that wanted on-time appointments, right? We gave them what they wanted, on-time appointments. Then he still had to give them pain relief. If he didn't, then I don't care how on time the appointment was, they would not have come back. So we often take our best thing, like pain relief, and we think that's all it's got to be on the marketing. But what other things do they want, and what's most important? And that's part of that discovery. So find your wow client, ask them what they want. It might shock you. I'd say 70% of the time I'm actually like, wow. And 30% it confirms. And then we give them that language, and then the journey goes. So, yeah.
Well, I definitely would have responded to that marketing. I think we need more doctors in the world who care about on-time appointments. But I did want to know, I don't want to miss your story, and we're getting on. So I'm interested to know about, you're out of film school. How do you go from someone who has experience to going to someone who has a production company?
It happened quite quickly. So I actually started making videos in high school. And so I think I had a little leg up when I got to film school. Like, people actually hired me to do videos when I was in high school. I made like skate videos for some of the skaters. Even the principal of my high school asked me to make videos for like the incoming freshmen, like training videos and things like that. So I was already going, and actually I was going to go to engineering school. I was going to follow the footsteps of my father and many of my other uncles and aunts, and go into that world. And then it was, one of my friends said, I'm going to art school. I'm going to be a photographer. And I was like, you're going to laptop. I was like, you can do that? I had no idea. I was like, wait, they'll teach you art? Like, I don't even know how that was possible. I didn't even think that it was possible. I was so much in this engineering mindset. And then he showed me the school, and he's like, yeah, they have film, and you love videos so much. And I was like, I do. And so then I changed all my college plans and went to film school, like within a matter of a week. And when I got there, I don't know if you've ever had this moment, but I got there, I was like, oh, these are my people. Like, I just immediately knew. And then this is what the kicker was. So remember, I told you my dad worked hard. They also, financially, they never really, stocked up money. That was a lesson I also learned what not to do from watching my father. So when I went to college, he said, I'm sorry, son, I don't have anything to help you. And because he made good money, there was no assistance. So I was one of those kids that was stuck in the middle. So I'm working 50-hour work weeks, going to school full time. And the edit suites at the film school were open till 2 a.m. And I thought, who would be editing till 2 a.m? Guess who it was? It was me. And there was one morning I woke up and I was splashing water on my face. I probably slept 90 minutes, and I'm going off to work. So I had to start at 5 a.m, and I had edited till 2 a.m. And I couldn't afford to live in San Francisco. I went to school in San Francisco. So I was commuting, so drive time and everything. And I looked in the mirror and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm my dad. I'm going to bed late. I'm getting up early. What happened? This is not what I want. And so I made it a must. I was like, I have to start a production company. I have to work for myself. I'm good at making films. People have already hired me. Let's go. And the kicker on this story is, at that time, this is in the 1990s, you couldn't get a handy cam and a laptop. it was $54,000 for the equipment I wanted to actually be marketable. And it was all digital. This is when everything was merging to digital just before HD. So we're moving out of, like, if anybody knows videos, like beta, SP, moving out of that and coming into digital. And so I asked for all this digital equipment, and the bank actually turned me down, and they said, here's some used equipment for 12 grand. And then I don't know what was in me, Thomas. I still don't know how I thought of this on the spot. But I actually did believe this. I said, I thought long and hard about asking for this particular equipment because no one in San Francisco has it. So it's the only advantage I have. I'm young. You see this, you're only giving me the $12,000 loan or offering it to me because I'm young and I'm just getting started. But I would argue that I might not be able to pay this because then I'm going to be like everyone else. I'm going to have all the old equipment that everyone else has, and I'm young. So I have all the disadvantage. If you allow me to have this equipment, then I will actually be the only one in San Francisco that has this equipment to start. I know other people will buy this after, but I'll be the first one. And so I have the best chance to market this and say, hey, come try this new digital equipment. And then they asked me to leave the room. I left and I could see them. It was like one of those glass windows and we're looking out at San Francisco Bay. So like the big bank. And I walked, they asked me to come back in and they're like, okay. And it was the first document this big. I never had bought a house yet. I mean, I'm 19, about to turn 20, this huge document. I was like, did they think I wouldn't sign this? I signed it as quick as I could. And it worked though. I landed an account with Nestle, doing some videos for them, and I was able to pay that bill. I was able to pay for that equipment. And so I think there was some must inside of me, and you hear that, like, it's like, I have to do this, I have to make it work. And there was a lot of hard times too, but I don't know if we have time for one. I can try to keep it really short, but how I got Nestle is even funny because is okay. Should I share that?
It was actually my next question was going to be, you've worked with some impressive clients. So can you shed any light on that? So you went straight into it anyway. So you go.
Well, that's funny. I must have been feeling your question, but the job that I had when I was going to film school was restoring cappuccino machines for Nescafe, or it wasn't Nescafe, it was called Capo Ristretto. So it was becoming part of Nestle and that suite. So I met someone at Nestle. So that was, and the marketing director came in once, and I'm just like this tech kid. And it's just the job, right? It was not the dream, right? I'm like working on this cappuccino machine, and the guy came in, and I heard him talking about some of the production they needed, and I was like, oh, I spoke up right away, and I said, I'm in film school, and he just took enough liking to me. He must have saw something in me. He took me aside and we talked for a minute. And he said, yeah, I'd love you to come share what you could do. Here's what we need. And I said, great. So I put together this proposal, and I go in, and I thought it was just going to be him. It was the whole marketing team. It was a board. I blew it. I blew the meeting. It was like horrible. And I was going to ask for $8,000, but I was like, it's Nestle, ask for 10. So I asked for 10,000, and I go in, and I produced the first video. And then this is how it happened. I basically blew the meeting. I thought I lost it. They called me the next day, and they said, you said it would be 10 grand and we need 5 videos. So can you do the first one for 2 grand? And I said, sure. So I do the first video. And after we do that, the marketing director, I'm meeting them at their office, and he says, hey, I got to come clean. And I was like, oh, I'm getting fired. He's like, listen, we hired you because we saw the tenacity inside of you. But the reality is we had $100,000 budgeted for all these videos. And we knew that if you blew the $2,000, we still had $98,000 to do it, but you did a great job. So we're going to keep working with you, but you have to raise your prices. So they actually started to mentor me. It was just like, and we ended up saving them $1 million in training with the videos that we did, because they were flying people around, and they never could get the training on video. It never was captured well. So somehow I was able to figure that out for them. And that led with that letter, right? A letter. Hey, they saved us money, Steve did. And so then I took that, and then I was able to move on. It's you get that first in, and then you got to use it well, right? So I got the door open, but I had to do it well. So
Great story. And I wanted to say the bank example is kind of a great example. It's a sales example, essentially, isn't it? Would you say
it
you're
really
quite a good
isn't.
salesperson?
I think there's something inside of me, from a young age, I guess it goes back to that. And my first coach, remember Jeffrey Slater, right after he met me, he said, "You have daddy issues." And I said, "I know." Because, part of me as a young boy, Thomas, I said, "I'll make money, Dad, so you can play with me." I mean, it really does come down. It's like that. I know that hits right in the heart, but it's like, and I've done a lot of work on it, so I could say that now without crying. But I mean, that's where, and again, being vulnerable. And I didn't grow up that way. Growing up as a little boy is like, "Don't be vulnerable. Why are you crying?" Like, this is not okay. And but I had to work through that. But I'm grateful for it. A lot of people would say that's horrible. And, yeah, it wasn't fun. And yeah, I did want to play with my dad as a young boy, but you know what? He gave me the gift to desire something different. And that pushed every one of these stories. I wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have went and got that equipment if I didn't want to work that job. What if I just followed my dad and I just worked at that job? Then would I have gotten that equipment? Would I have gotten an account with Nestle? Probably not. It was the why. Now let's go to Simon Sinek, right? Like, my why drove those moments, and I did not want to fail.
Well, whenever I cover the topic of self-knowledge, I'm like, I really want to go down that route with you. But there's so many topics that I want to talk to you about. But
part two, maybe.
Yeah, I know. Tell me about it. But what are your goals, Steve?
Well, now it's to pass this on. My mission, and I'm clear as day. I feel like my life's mission, I was put here to help people transition in the way that we live and work. So my mission, quite simply, is to help people have the freedom that they desire. And I do that through all the methods that I'm sharing with you today. And I feel like a deep responsibility, and I think, again, I'm grateful for the contrast in my life. I spent 12 years of doing the hard working way that everyone tells us to do it. And then I've done over another decade, even more now. Wow, time goes, right? But so it's over 25 years in together. And basically you can say, like, having the yin and yang. And so with that, my goal is to, right now, we want in the next 3 years to help 1,000 companies and document those, so that we can now go, because it's been dozens of companies, but now to push ourselves to 1,000, then my bigger goal would be in 10 years, we would reach 100,000 companies, that they would be using some of these methods, if not all of them, and start to have a different way. And I think by then, the reason that's my goal is then in my lifetime, I could see the shift in all of us on this planet to living. I guess what's not okay, to say the other side of it, it's no longer okay for me to see humans work till some old age and then maybe in a wheelchair or with a walker get to enjoy life. Like, that idea is just like broken to me. Like, okay, we're going to work really, really hard, and then at some elderly age, we're going to get to retire and have this, all of a sudden, we're going to have this life. And by the way, you might not be able to walk that well then, I mean, that just feels so broken. And so that's my goal, to like live every decade of our life well we earn. I'm not saying to give, it's not an either or anymore for me, Thomas. Like, no more. Like, let's earn and let's live.
Sounds like it could be some sort of Netflix documentary. What do you think about that?
I actually, a few of my friends that are still in Hollywood are calling me now. And I just talked to one of them. She said to me, I've made a lot of people laugh and I've made all these shows. I really want to do something that means something to the world. And I said, oh, perfect timing. So I might be teaming up with some people. You might see something like that soon.
I didn't just do spoilers there, did I?
Well, no, it's okay. And maybe someone else heard this and they're going to call me now. I'm open for other options. No contract signed yet.
Well, I really appreciate the value you provided today and the story. Like I said, I feel like I could speak to you about a whole nother episode, because I think You're highly engaging, very good speaker, and yeah, lots of interesting stuff. And I always appreciate anyone who quotes Jim Rohn. So, Steve, where is the best place for people to find you?
I don't have the easiest name to spell, but if you go to Steve Napolitan, that's Napolitan.com, and hopefully if we can put in the show notes or whatever, then why I always put people to that website is because then you can see a little bit about me. It links to our podcast, the More Business, More Life podcast, and then also whatever flavor of social media you like, then you can pick your flavor and follow us there. So thank you. Thank you.
All right, Steve. You're welcome back anytime.
It's my pleasure. I'll watch for the invite. Thank you, Thomas.